Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this episode we're going to continue to work on the MGA. And in the previous episodes we already have done a lot of work on the MGA. In this episode we're going to start painting the body. And as the saying goes, preparing it is 90% of the work and 10% is actually painting. And you'll see this in this video. So we're going to prepare and start to paint the parts on the body of the car. You could take your car to a professional paint booth if you want to have a perfect finish. However, you could also create your own paint booth and then do everything yourself. And this is what I've done in the past. I've built my own paint booth, and you can see some of the fans that I have here and an additional fan for more overpressure inside the booth. If you want to know how you can build your own paint booth for a minimum cost, then have a look on my channel, because I have a couple of videos on how I did build this paint booth. And it has worked pretty well for me so far. Okay, the results are not the same as coming out of a professional paint booth. I may have a speckle of dust here and there, but I don't really care too much about that. Of course, if you have a professional paint booth, it's going to be a lot better and easier to work. In the previous episodes, we picked up this 1958 MGA, which was imported in the Netherlands about 10 years ago from Texas, and it was converted to a race car. In the last couple of years it was used on the racetrack, and it had quite some little crashes and little accidents, and we call those typically kisses, with minor damage. But by the end of last year it was involved in a very serious accident on the track with a lot of damage. During that crash, 3 of the fenders were totally destroyed, 2 front fenders and the right rear fender. So the fenders we are using are polyester fenders. These are not brand new. So we're going to have a little bit of work to clean them up and get them painted. And also the passenger door was really badly damaged, and it had a huge dent here, which I already have been able to remove it partially, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So for that I will take the door off. The valance was scattered and we had to replace it with a new built aluminum version, which we created a couple of videos ago, so you can check as well on the channel how we created this. You can see how the metal already starts to bend. It feels like this is going very smoothly. And there's nothing wrong with something like this. On the right front we had a real serious deep dent, and that dent we had to pull out with some hydraulic pistons. So, go too far there. I think that is going quite all right. To look a lot better. I'm still going to try to get all the little dents out, but it's very hard to get to it. And then we welded up the holes afterwards. We also used a hammer and a dolly to get it as close as possible to the shape it's supposed to be. But at the end we got it kind of into shape. And here we have some pieces of that crash. You know, this is all what's left from the fenders really, and the front valance. This was part of the front valance for sure. The lights were all broken up, and this is part of the front right fender. You can see it's really been hit badly. In the back we had a very similar issue. We had a real serious dent here. You can still see the crumbling a little bit here, but we were able to get it as straight as possible, again with some hydraulic pistons. But also the rear valance actually had a nasty nick right here in the middle, and the whole thing was like moved sideways. But we were able to pull this straight, and We also had a opening for the fuel tank here. I have welded this up. We also closed everything up because I'm going to have a fuel cell inside. This area was really nasty because the whole thing was pushed inwards towards the other side of the car. So the whole body that's on the frame moved inwards. So I had to use a ram jack at the inside to push this whole thing back out. And hopefully everything will fit. It might be a little bit tricky to work or not. I can hear. I think the reason that they sold the car very cheap was that they figured out that there was a lot of expenses to be done to get this car back in a good condition. Although mechanically the car is good, the chassis is straight because I did check it out. However, I think they were considering the fact that there were too many things bent, that the body which is sitting on the frame was shifted a bit to the left, and that they couldn't get it straight again. But I was able to get it right, to get it straight again, so I'm very happy with that. But of course, it's still a lot of work to continue, because after we straightened everything up, we started to trial fit the fenders, and that was quite a bit of work to put those polyester fenders onto the car. We had issues on the left-hand side that we couldn't get the gap right between the door and the fender, so we had to cut off some pieces on that fender. This is how it goes sometimes. You have to adapt and adjust all the time. Well, the rear bonnet luckily is not bent or really dented, but it has some nasty scratches, so there's only one thing to do with this, is to sand it down, get it all sorted out and get it repainted. Once I got this whole area dented out as much as I could by pulling it out, I welded up all the holes we had where we were using a hook to pull things forward, and I tried to get this metal as close as possible to the shape it's supposed to be, so I only needed to use a minimum amount of polyester putty. And there's still some on it, but before I did put the polyester putty on, I went to the bare metal, I cleaned it all up and made sure there's no rust on it, and then I applied my first coat of putty. To finish these dents, I'm using a polyester putty, and I guess most of you know how to apply this. It is a two-component part, so you have a hardener or a catalyzer as they call it, and then you mix things with a spatula on a piece of paper very well, and then you take a stroke of that and then you apply it onto the car. Now be aware that this stuff dries very fast. You have an open time of about 3-4 minutes and that's it. So the putty that I'm using is black putty. See how black that is? And it's pretty hard as well, so when it dries out it's tough to sand it down. You can use soft putty if this is what you like, but I like this hard one. So now that you have the putty on your spatula, now you can apply it on the bare metal, and forget the idea that you can do it in one coat. You're not going to get this straight from the first time. Maybe if it's a very small place you could, but in this case it needed multiple layers of that. So once you apply that first stroke, don't worry about all the little edges and rims you're going to get. This you can then take off with this file, and I never wait for the full 100% until it's really bone hard. Whenever it's getting hard, that's when I'm using this one, because then it goes off easier, and I'm just going along the body lines. Try to shape it as much as you can. I know I can't show you that because I did this part already. And then, once that is more or less in shape, I use my sander with vacuum, and I'll show you that in a few minutes anyway, and then I'm sanding the whole surface. I'm never sanding with my free hands, because that you get depressions where your fingers are, so it's better to use a sanding block or a sander altogether. I'm using a grit of 120, but you can use a grit 80 as well. It depends a bit on how much you need to take off. And then the question is, okay, where do I need to put extra stuff on? And that is not always that easy. But the best tools you have are your hands. So gently go over the surface and you will feel where the depressions are. And I can feel right here we have a depression. It's like sliding over the legs of a beautiful woman, in this nice soft skin. And it's the same thing on your car. Treat your car like it's a pretty woman. And here is that depression. So this is where we need to fill things up. And then I mark it. So here we have a depression and there. So that's where I'm going to put a new coat up of this putty. So let's make some putty. And I don't make too much in one go. I do it on a piece of paper, and the spatula that I use is not the same that I'm going to use for actually mixing things, because otherwise if you put it back in the pot, your pot will get hard. And now we mix it. And here we go. Now obviously you have to make sure that you remove the dust before you apply the next coat of putty onto that depression area. And that's it. You can see all these little rims. I don't worry about it. We'll clean it up. So while the back is drying, I'm just going to do the front and get a new piece of paper and start all over again. So now we do it in the front, and I'm going to degrease it. And of course I already took all the dust off. And you'll see how much stuff still comes off. See that? Okay, so same story. Try to feel where we have a depression, and it's here. And we have something here as well. So this is where I need to put the putty up, and we have some scratches here that we need to fill in. Remember to mix the putty properly. I think that should be about right. I'm using multiple spatulas on the car, so each time I make a new load of polyester putty, before I apply it to the car, I use a different spatula, and then I let the previous spatula dry, because getting the polyester off the spatula is a bit messy when it's wet, so it's better to let it dry up a bit. And this is now about 5 minutes, and you can see it's already fairly dry. It's still a little bit sticky, not a lot. And when it's dry, you can actually bend the spatula and it will pop off, or you just can try to get it off like this. See how easy that comes off? And you don't make a big mess. So it is not 100% dry, but almost. So now I'm going to use my grate, and I think that's what you call it. I'm just going to go along the edge to take most of it off. Not too much, of course, but enough. And it will take off all the high points. And I'm not using a lot of force on this. And I know it hasn't cured fully, 100%, but that's okay. I'm just taking off the rough edges. We still have a dent here. I could of course fill it up with putty, but I'm going to try to get the dent out with pulling it with a glue stick. And in the back I can't knock on it because it is like double paneled. So I need to use something else, and I'm just going to try to have some of those plastic tabs glued onto it, like so, and then actually pull it. So these are plastic tabs that you're going to use together with some glue, and you're going to glue it on the paint, and you can actually remove dents out of bodywork without damaging the paint. and then you lift that with this tool here, and hopefully we can get it done. But on this car it may be a little bit more difficult because this is pretty rough steel and hard steel, not like on modern cars. As always, we need to degrease it, and I'm using some acetone for that. And now we need to apply some hot glue to it. And, just stick it on there. And then we let it cool down and stick. Just in case we need to pull on two sides, because it's a pretty long dent. So pulling it, and you can see how the metal moves a bit. Not enough. Most likely it's going to break off. I just want to try it a couple of times. See how the metal moves. And this is how you may be able to get the dents out. And now it jumped off. It's not a big deal. And try this one. If you pull too hard, it breaks off. Right, let's do a couple more pulls. And it came off. That's alright. Let's see how it is. I just put some acetone up, and these things should peel off pretty easy then. We got some of the paint that came off. It's getting better, but we ain't there yet. I might give it one more try on the top. Alright. Just squeezing a couple of times. Eventually, I'm afraid, it will break off. So the dent is out to some extent, but we still have to apply some putty on this. There's no way around it. Let me clean it up now, and as you could see, it has been repaired before. So now we're going to apply putty to it again and start all over again. I'm going to apply some putty to it, and again I might have to do this a couple of times. And when it's all dried up, we start sanding it, and I'm going to use a grit 120 again, just to get it smooth. You will notice while I'm sanding that I'm every so often use my hands to feel where I am, so I can take the high points off. Of course you cannot take the depressions out, but the high points you can take off. So it's important that you feel and check as much as you can to figure out where you are, and if it's not okay, then apply putty again. I think this feels quite alright. You notice that I forgot to turn on the vacuum cleaner while I was sanding. So that's the piping. This is the part that goes in between the fender and the body of the car, and I think this is gonna fit just fine. So we are good. So if you're happy with the sanding, it is always good to use a light in the form of a line like this LED light that I have here, and you go along this side and you can see in the reflection if you have a smooth surface or not, or where you have a depression or a high point. Now, of course, you can't do it when it's dull, so therefore you need to make it wet, just like it was painted, because your paint will be glossy. And then by looking with the light and going over it, you can actually see where the high points are or not. So let me show you. See how you see the light, and if the reflection of the light is still a straight line in the wet, then you know that the surface is very flat and smooth, and this looks quite alright.
I think I mentioned it before that preparing is 90% of the work, and unfortunately there is always a lot of sanding to be done because there's a lot of little details we need to figure out. And I like to use my electrical sander here. I also have one which is pneumatic, but I like the electrical one because I can attach my vacuum cleaner to it.
So here and there we have some of those little pit holes, so I want to fill those up. And typically they are filled up with dust from sanding. This feels quite alright, except here on the top, there we need to add a bit, and then we have to fill out all these little holes. I think this should be good enough. Also for all the small little holes we have. Now you can apply very thin putty to that as well. So I'm all done sanding on this side, but you see here we have a little scratch, so we need to fill that up. Also here I have some imperfections, so all these little spots we need to correct. And to do so, I'm using some very thin putty to correct all these small things. And this doesn't dry as fast, and it's very soft as well, so you need to let it sit for quite a while before you start sanding this. So the car is now basically ready to put the primer on, and the primer that I'm going to use is a high build surfacer. It's fairly thick. I'm going to spray a couple of coats on there, and then we're going to sand again. But of course, first of all, now I need to have the car dusted and then pushed it in the paint booth and then tape it all off, and then we can start.